This is Barry Zalma on insurance for YouTube. I am an attorney who has retired from the practice of law and now spend my time as an insurance consultant, insurance claims consultant, and insurance claims expert witness involving ideas on claims handling and the tort of bad faith. I work for both policyholders and insurers as long as I have no conflict of interest. You can reach me at Barry Zalma Inc. at my telephone or my email address at your convenience. Today I'd like to talk about arson for profit. Arson is basically the most dangerous, evil form of insurance fraud, because people who set fire to their homes or their businesses for the sole purpose of defrauding an insurer usually end up hurting or killing themselves, their neighbors, and firefighters. There are so many other ways to commit insurance fraud and to profit from it without hurting anybody. It is amazing to me that people continue to commit the crime of arson for profit. It ends up with people finding themselves, as did one arsonist I dealt with, entering a building, spreading his flammable liquids so as to burn down the structure, only to find out that the door he entered had no doorknob on the inside and ended up being what the fire department calls a crispy critter, a dead man laying inside the building he set on fire. To understand arson, however, you must first understand fire. Fire has been useful to the human race since it was first discovered by cavemen when it was set by a lightning strike, and was carried around with them from scene to scene until they learned how to make fire themselves. Fire simply is a reaction between carbon-based things like wood. When sufficient heat is applied and the fuel exists along with oxygen. So you need all three things: heat, fuel, oxygen to start a fire. So in your kitchen, when your frying pan starts on fire, if you put a top on it, the fire goes out because there's no oxygen. Or if you spray it with baking soda, the fire goes out because there's no oxygen available. If you put water on a fire, the water does not extinguish the fire, it cools it down. And that's why there is no more fire. Or if you take away the fuel, that's why in wildfires, fire departments will use bulldozers to clear the area that the fire is moving towards so that there'd be no fuel. And once the fuel is gone, the fire is extinguished. Most arson fires are not set for profit. Most are set by juveniles in dumpsters. Most are spite fires. Many fires start in beds, probably because one spouse caught the other fooling around, and to stop with someone they shouldn't, and to get back at them, they set fire to the bed, which is where the wrongful deed occurred. But arson for profit, now that's a different situation. Let me tell you the story about a Southern Californian who came to Southern California as a Jewish refugee from what was then Soviet Armenia. He wasn't a Jew. He had no idea what Judaism was, but at the request of what was then known as the KGB, the Russian spy network, he was sent to the United States as a sleeper agent. That is, someone who would act as a refugee, set up a business, set up a home, go to work, and do nothing unusual until called upon to be a person in charge of the Soviet intelligence network. Now, what happened was, after he arrived in the United States, he came with a great deal of funds, because in Soviet Armenia, this gentleman was a criminal. What he did was he bought and sold diamonds, icons, jewelry of any kind, and he made profits from it, to the point where he owned a 3-story stone house up on a hill overlooking Mount Ararat. And when he was finally arrested by the Soviet police, he decided he'd rather not go to a gulag, and he would become a good Soviet citizen. And the police, wanting to get rid of him because he was a #1 criminal in Soviet Armenia, offered him the opportunity to be a refugee, where the Jewish refugee organizations would help support him when he got to the United States, and that he could take all of his personal wealth with him to set up business in the United States. And that's exactly what he did. When he arrived in the United States, he sold some of his diamonds and bought a gas station. He worked at the gas station. Because he was a criminal, he couldn't be a totally pleasant owner of a gas station. He would run credit card slips 3 and 4 times and profit from gasoline sales he never made. He bought gasoline from farmers who didn't have to pay excise taxes on it, and diesel fuel from farmers, and he sold them at a profit, adding the tax that he never paid to the government. He became fairly wealthy in a few years, bought a house on the hills overlooking the San Fernando Valley in an area known as Sherman Oaks. It was a big, beautiful home. It had 5 bedrooms and was filled with his antiques and icons he brought with him from the Soviet Union. But he was not a very nice person. His wife was suffering from breast cancer. The house was not well maintained. The roof leaked. He made an insurance claim. The insurance claim was paid. He was pleasantly well off. What, had he really been Jewish, he would call he was comfortable. What he also was a Armenian nationalist. And his insurance broker was also an Armenian nationalist. And they both supported an Armenian terrorist organization whose only reason for being was to kill Turks, because they believed that the Turks wrongfully killed millions of Armenians during what is known as the Armenian Genocide at the turn of the 20th century. And the Armenians hold grudges, and they are known to, and in fact had in Los Angeles, assassinated a Turkish ambassador or diplomat on the streets of Los Angeles. And the broker came to our friend, the Armenian criminal, and he said it's necessary that we support our organization so that we can have sufficient funds to kill Turks. Our friend said, I don't make that much money from my gas station, and I've sold most of my diamonds. How can I help? And the broker said, what you can do is buy a very large policy on your house and contents, and then we will set it afire, and the insurance company will build you a brand new house, and with the money we collect on the contents, we will be able to donate more than $1 million to our organization. How do we do this, he asked. Well, first thing, the broker said, is you must photograph all of your contents, all of your icons and artworks and Ivazovsky oil paintings and Fabergé jewelry items, but you must do so with Vaseline on the lens of your camera so that it is slightly fuzzy photos so that no one can look at the pictures and say these are not real or these are not exactly what we say they are. And then we get an appraisal. And I will introduce you to an appraiser who is also a seller of antiques at auction, who has less than an honorable history. And this man will prepare an appraisal of all of your items. And that appraisal will reach over $1 million, even though your property is not worth that much money. And then we will submit it to an insurance company who will accept the appraisal because insurance companies don't know what a real appraisal is and what a real value is. They take the word of people like us because they believe everyone treats them with the utmost of good faith. And then, with help from the experts, after the policies are acquired, with help from the experts from our organization, we will teach you to set fire to your home so that it is totally destroyed and so that there is no evidence available. Well, our Armenian immigrant said, sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. And he did. And he obtained from the underwriters at Lloyd's London a personal articles floater on all of his contents with the fake appraisal from the auctioneer of over $1 million in replacement cost on a policy that was required to pay whatever the policy said, regardless of the true value of the items. And from an American company, he obtained an over $1.5 million policy on a homeowner's policy for the rebuilding of the house and a place to live while it was being rebuilt. Once the policies were issued, he and his broker waited a month, and then they trained with the expert from the terrorist organization his eldest son to set fire to the building. And he showed him how to pour gasoline from their own gas station throughout the house, connected with rolls of cloth that would act as a trail for the fire from room to room. And he would then set fire to the house late at night. And the reason he was able to have a perfect alibi was that the night they chose for the fire was a night where an Armenian Businessman's Association dinner dance was to take place. And the owner, his wife, and his 13-year-old son went to the businessman's dinner dance, although the boy really didn't want to go. He had no choice. His second son went on a date in his Bronco to a motion picture at a drive-in movie with a girlfriend and a Doberman Pinscher because they had to protect their dog. And the eldest son then drove late at night up to the house. He spread gasoline in every room. He laid down the trailers as he was instructed. He made sure all the windows and doors were closed. And before he lit the fire, he had to use the facilities, and he flushed the toilet where he had poured gasoline on the carpets. And being a good boy, he closed the door. And then he went out to the front of the house. Now, by the time this had happened, the gasoline had changed from a liquid to mostly fumes. And the young man did not know, and he hadn't been trained to not spend a lot of time in the house after pouring the gasoline, that 1 gallon of gasoline as fumes is equal to 13 sticks of dynamite. And he threw a match in. And when he did, the house exploded. It knocked him to the ground, fortunately, burning the eyebrows right off his face and giving him a small burn on his forehead. He was lucky. He ran to his car and with the lights out drove down the hill while the fire burned. But unfortunately for the scheme, a fire department helicopter was a few miles away and saw the explosion, flew directly over the house and did a water drop and put the fire out before it could destroy the whole house. Fire department arrived. Arson investigators came with them. The arson investigators were clearly certain it was an arson, since there was no question when they went into the bathroom, they were able to literally wring half a gallon of gasoline out of the carpets. They determined it to be an arson. Now, arson is not excluded. A fire is a fire. What is excluded by an insurance policy is the fraud to set a fire with an intent to deceive an insurance company. The arson investigators found what had happened and determined that there was a fraud, and when the Armenian gentleman, his wife, and youngest son arrived from the dinner dance, they interviewed him, only to learn that he was worried about $2 million in diamonds in a floor safe in a closet. The arson investigators immediately went to the closet and found the floor safe with the door open. It was empty except for water from the firefighting efforts. And interestingly enough, the bolt on the safe was out, even though the dial had been knocked off, but the bolt was out. And it is difficult, if not impossible, to open a safe if the bolt is still in and you knock the dial off. So something was strange. And the arson investigators put it down to a crime. They didn't know who was responsible, but they suspected our young Armenian gentleman. And since the fire had not destroyed everything, they took as many pictures as they could, only to find the next day it burned again. And it burned again because they needed a total destruction, and they needed to keep the insurance company away. And tomorrow, or in my next video, I will explain what happened to the insurance claim. This is Barry Zalma. You can learn about arson and arson for profit from my insurance claims book or from my books on insurance fraud, which are available on Amazon.com and at my website, Zelma.com.